Hey everybody, I'm Jill Redfern and welcome to Third Shift Movement Shop, home of literal technique. This tutorial is about the basics of using the Latissimi Dorsi as a stabilizer in our dance technique. The primary function of the lats is to move the humerus, which is this bone in our arm. It is also one of the main stabilizers of the vertebrae, however, and one of the ways in which it stabilizes the vertebrae is by its ability to compress the ribcage barrel during exhalation. We're going to use that information as a way to work our way into feeling the contraction and stabilizing nature of the lats in our technique in a minute. But first, I want to go quickly through some anatomical information. I did a tutorial on the basic anatomy of the Latissimi Dorsi, so if you haven't seen that, check it out. This tutorial builds on that one. But just as a summary, 5 places where the lats originate. The first is the bottom angle of the scapula. These are the shoulder blades. The second is the spinous processes of thoracic vertebrae 7 through 12, T7 through T12. The fourth is the third is the spinous processes of the lumbar and the sacral vertebrae by way of the thoracolumbar fascia. This TLF is where the muscle originates out of, but that TLF is attached directly to the spinous processes of these vertebrae. They also originate at the iliac crest, at this back third of the iliac crest, right where the sacrum is. And then the last place is the surfaces of ribs 9 through 12, or 10 through 12, depending on your body. But that means that the muscle fibers come over to about here on your rib cage. You have to line up with the 12th and the 11th floating rib. So this muscle is attached to the rib cage barrel, the vertebrae, and the pelvic barrel. It is one of the central muscles because of that. It supports the central bones. So the way the lats stabilize the vertebrae when we're dancing has to do with their function of compressing the ribcage barrel during exhalation. When we exhale, the lats help us push air out of the lungs. So you can see they're here on this bottom part of the ribs. When we contract the lats to exhale, we're doing it without knowing it. It's happening. The rib cage is going to compress in. And hopefully that rings a bell with you from the external obliques tutorial, because the external obliques compress the rib cage barrel as if we're expelling air. The rib cage narrows when we contract the external obliques. So the way in which these two muscles are connected in the compression exhalation function of the muscle is that they interdigitate. They interlock. The muscle fibers of the external obliques and the lats interlock on the side of the body. The lats come over here on ribs 9 through 12. The external obliques, as you might remember, they originate starting at rib 5, but once we get to rib 9, 10, 11, and 12, where their fibers are coming together is where they're going to interlock. And that creates huge stabilization for the rib cage barrel. So let's do a really simple exercise to feel the contraction of both of these muscles. I'm going to turn to the side. You're going to find a parallel first position, and the next thing we're going to do is find the anatomical curves of the vertebrae. That means we have no flexion in the lumbosacral joint and no flexion in the thoracolumbar joint. Find your anatomical curves. Now bring your arms up so that they're on a slight diagonal and your elbows are slightly bent. And we're going to pretend that we have a bar above our head. We're going to wrap our hands around the bar. Check your anatomical curves again before we start to move. What we're going to do is inhale, and on the exhale, we're going to pull this bar down toward our shoulders. And in the process, we're going to contract the lats and the externals and let them compress the rib cage barrel. So here we go. Inhale and exhale. Keep the contraction. If you feel like you have lost any part of your anatomical curve, correct it at the vertebrae. Now let your arms hang at your sides. Keeping these two muscles contracted, you should feel around this 360 degrees around the lower area of the rib cage barrel stabilization. This is what it will feel like when you've contracted both of these muscles, compressed the rib cage barrel, and stabilized the vertebrae. Keeping the contraction. Notice where that is. It's above the lumbar vertebrae. That's it. The contraction is supporting above the lumbar vertebrae. So when we talked about not flexing or extending in the thoracolumbar joint, these two muscles are going to help us do that. We have to find the anatomical curve first before we contract the muscle. But once we found it, these two muscles, the externals and the lats, are going to help us maintain the anatomical curve in this area. Okay, in your class this week, start with a visualization on the floor. Find this muscle, the lat, in your own back, on your own bones. Picture them. Feel the compression drop the rib cage barrel. Feel the compression stabilize the vertebrae. See your anatomical curves while the muscles are contracted. When you get into the actual class, any opportunity you have when you are upright to practice compressing, it will feel like a drop into place of the rib cage barrel. Correct any discrepancies at the vertebrae when you're dancing. Don't worry about the position of the front of the rib cage. Correct at the vertebrae when you're dancing. Just practice that throughout the week. Do the visualization, feel the compression, feel it in this area in the body. Okay, I'll see you next week.